Hello and welcome to the Breaking Muscle Podcast. My name is Pete Hitzeman and I am your host and managing editor for BreakingMuscle.com. Most athletes put hours of thought and research into meticulously planning every workout and training cycle, but then taking care of the nutrition side of the house becomes a chore. At the same time, we all know that no matter how perfectly we train, if our diets are garbage, we won't get the results we're looking for. Joining us for today's show is Breaking Muscle's resident creator of culinary masterpieces, Kari Lund. Kari's passion for mindful eating started with her struggle to overcome her own health issues, and now she's bringing that first-hand knowledge to kitchens across the country. We dive into how she got started creating her own recipes, what clean eating means to her, and the importance of eating with a purpose. If you're interested in trying out some of Kari's nutritional strategies, check out her new 28-day clean eating challenge, which can be found at training.breakingmuscle.com. Joining us this afternoon is Kari Lund. Kari is a blogger and food magician. She has been writing for Breaking Muscle for a couple of years now, creating the most beautiful and amazing athletic-inspired dishes for all of you people for free. And now she's coming out with a new nutrition guide for all of us to do better than plain chicken breast and rice and improve our lives a little bit. Welcome, Kari, to the show. And how did you get started cooking all of these things?
Well, I grew up eating fresh veggies from my garden and cooking with my grandmother. So I've always had a really strong interest in food and food culture. My creative background is actually in the apparel product development world, where I've had a lot of opportunity to travel, sample different cuisines, and I think a lot of that really inspired a drive to sample things with my own foods. As far as starting my blog and so forth, I actually started that based on my own health needs. I suffer from something called Meniere's disease, and I've had that for about 20 years, and my health was it was in bad shape after having children. So I had to do a lot of different dietary experiments to eliminate dairy and some other things, and went on a dietary challenge to kind of figure out how to get myself feeling great. Through that experience, I came to realize I was always creating new recipes for myself, and why not share them with everybody else?
Awesome. So your dive into creative nutrition was by biological necessity. There were things that you just flat couldn't tolerate anymore. How does that? Do you train for a sport as well, or are you purely on the nutrition side of the house?
At the moment, I'm mostly on the nutrition side of the house. I used to be a runner back, years ago at this point, and I just, because of my health issues, I couldn't even drive some days.
Oh, wow.
So coming back into now being able to exercise more fully, being able to even just go on a run without feeling dizzy I love it.
Yeah, running while not being dizzy is definitely a plus. I've run while I'm dizzy, and that's not fun at all. You end up all over the road, people honk at you. It's kind of embarrassing. So one of the things I've noticed with the content that you've put out for us on Breaking Muscle is your food is beautiful. In addition to being good for you, and it tastes good. I'm assuming when you make it. When I make it, but the food you make is visually appealing. How is that? Do you put as much thought into the visual presentation of your food as you do, the macronutrient profiles and all those things?
I do. I love to eat food that looks good. And, we first, as humans, we eat with our eyes and all of our senses. So what we see, if it looks good, like Andrew Zimmern says on his Bizarre Foods, if it looks good, eat it. So I like things to look pretty. And coming from a creative background with apparel, things have to look good, right? So it's sort of playing into my food presentation. A lot of times I will be inspired too by pictures in a magazine, or I'll be in a restaurant and the chef has put together something amazing that just looks phenomenal. And I try to recreate things that have similar look to it, and just make sure that the nutritional piece is on par with what I really feel like needs to be.
So one of the things, tangent to that question, one of the things that a lot of people run into when they're on what I would call a restrictive diet, so if they're trying to follow a paleo plan, or if they have a nutritional sensitivity they need to look after, one of the things, it's like a crisis the first time you go to the grocery store and you realize all the things you can't buy anymore. And for my wife and I, when we first started to try to, I won't say that we follow paleo or anything, but we first try to be a little bit more responsible with the things that we were eating, is that everything started to look and taste the same. Is there a method that, you encourage people to focus on a certain area, or kind of a methodology to expand their flavor profiles they work with?
When I first started, started changing some of my health stuff, I had to be on a low sodium diet, and you can imagine things that are not salted don't taste great. So I really learned herbs and seasoning spices, like season your food start to finish. Don't just season things at the very end, season it throughout. So you start in the beginning, add some seasoning, and you do need to have salt. That's not something you can skip. Salt enhances flavors in food, obviously without overdoing it. And when you're eating whole foods and cooking from scratch, you typically don't have to worry about sodium content as much, because you're not throwing in processed foods that already have all that extra sodium and sugars already thrown in. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. There's cooking from scratch. It's surprising how much flavor you can add into a food and not overdo it.
Yes.
But how many times? So you have dozens of articles and hundreds of photographs of these like gorgeously prepared. How many times did you completely whiff on a new recipe and go, "This is completely inedible. I'm throwing it away"?
Well, I have. One time, my husband remembers quite vividly, I was trying to make a vegan mac and cheese. You cannot, mac and cheese is not mac and cheese if you can't have cheese, right? So he actually scrapped the food out. I ate it because it was made with like nutritional yeast, all these really healthy things. Scrapped it out, and he went over and grabbed Little Caesars for the rest of the family.
Oh my,
that's like the one and only time it was just that terrible. But failure is always an option for me. So if I do make a recipe that's not super great, I either decide, you know what, that's just not going to work, period. Just toss it out. Or we start over from scratch again, and I'll remake things until I'm really happy with it. Sometimes that means 4 or 5 different times.
So how many kids are you feeding in addition to your husband?
3.
Okay.
So it's family of 5.
Yeah, you've got a passel to feed. Do you have like backup 10-minute prep meals in case something goes terribly awry in the kitchen?
I almost always have. There's always frozen veggies in my freezer, and there's always like frozen like chicken breasts or chicken tenders that can pretty much be like sliced, diced, and put together in a real quick manner.
Okay, gotcha. So talk to me about your new nutrition guide. You've done 40 days of clean eating with us before, and I think you already have at least one recipe book out. Where are you going with this new nutrition guide, and what's the philosophy behind it?
This one is a framework it's a 28-day clean eating plan, and it's kind of based on my own experience with trying an anti-inflammatory diet, which is somewhat similar to, you'll hear about like the Whole30 or like you mentioned, the paleo style of eating. So this framework is not as restrictive as either of those by any means, but it just focuses on whole foods, easy or simple to make recipes that anybody can make, things that are good for your whole family. So I made all of these recipes for my whole family, and no complaints from the children yet.
Well, that's a crucial test to pass too.
It totally is, But the eating plan is really based on a challenge to eat clean, whole, natural foods that are unprocessed with no refined sugars, no refined grains for a month, and just to kind of see how you feel after the challenge.
Yeah, I've found that my wife and I have, like, one time a year, usually in December because it's Christmas and everything, we'll kind of let our hair down when it comes to nutrition a little bit. And then in January you clean it back up, and it's always like, yep, sugar withdrawal is a thing. I'm definitely suffering, but it's always amazing to me when we come out of that cleanup phase. The first time we'll go out for pizza or something, it just hits you like a brick wall. You're so just destroyed from these things that you're just not used to eating. So that it's a very educational process.
It makes you feel so different.
Let's talk a little bit about clean eating. You've kind of touched on some different aspects of it, but everybody seems to have their own sort of for lack of a better term, philosophy behind what clean eating actually means.
Sure.
Whether it means, lowering certain macronutrients, or just staying away from processed things, or just staying away from grains. What's the sort of 40-word definition of clean eating for you?
For me, it's being mindful of what is going into your body. So, and it's kind of you eat with a purpose. You are really being conscientious of how what you eat makes you feel, which does include then whole foods as minimally processed or ingredients that you'll recognize, getting rid of the toxin loads, so paying attention to how your animals are raised, the protein sources that you're getting from, because whatever they eat ends up being in their meat and is what you end up consuming ultimately. And same thing with plants. If you're eating plant vegetable matter that's coming from heavily fertilized or pesticide-laden soil, you're consuming that as well. So for me, clean eating means eating conscientiously about meats that are pasture-raised, things like that, perhaps organic if that's something that's in your budget. Obviously, eating a higher quantity of fruits and veggies is going to outweigh, higher quality is going to outweigh, and higher quantity is going to outweigh eating none at all. And I also don't think that there's any specific way of eating that's perfectly right for everyone. But like clean eating, I guess for me is, and I had to eliminate dairy for a long time too, so that was part of my clean eating strategy initially. But otherwise, I would just say it's not processed foods, it's no refined sugars, no refined grains, but does include yes to whole grains, obviously any whole fruit veggie combination, and then responsibly raised meats and proteins.
Yeah, that's huge for me as well. I actually have a farm in the family. We raise Black Angus cattle, so responsibly raised meats is definitely something that's in my wheelhouse. I have raised, loaded, sorted, banded and tagged, done all of the things with our cows, and everybody's astonished.
To toss bales.
Yeah, everybody's astonished that our cows can get as huge and healthy as they are, and they literally just eat grass all year.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, ours did too. We had cattle on the farm, and I raise backyard chickens right now, not for meat, but I do it for eggs.
Oh, yeah. Pastured eggs are the best thing in the world.
Oh,
they're so good.
Heavenly.
That's something I think a lot of people are starting to become aware of, is that the things that go into your food go into you, and it's more than just the ingredients list, on the stuff you buy from the grocery store, but yeah, what are the animals eating? What's in the soil that your vegetables are raised in? Everybody thinks it's some kind of magic that the tomatoes that they grow for themselves in their gardens at home taste so much better than the tomatoes you get from the store, but there's like a really solid scientific reason for that. It's because the soil profile at your house is probably pretty close to what you need environmentally. So
yep, absolutely.
I think
Well, you can taste the difference in the meats too. Like if you've tasted something that's a conventionally raised beef versus a pasture-raised beef, so much different.
Oh man, I can't do it anymore. I get sides of beef from my brother every year, not for free, but I can't go to a restaurant and order like a sirloin anymore because it tastes like corn. And it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but to me, it's just so bizarre that I just can't have it anymore. What are your favorite kitchen tools? Like, what do you get excited when you go in the kitchen? I'm about to make a thing like
a really good chef's knife.
Okay.
Maybe that sounds, but there's so much chopping involved when you're cooking for yourself that having one that cuts and isn't going to cut your finger. I mean, maybe it'll cut your finger off if you're not careful, but sharp's better. Easy chopping is fantastic. Like you don't want to be chopping tomatoes with a dull knife. That's just not happiness.
Worst thing in the world.
Yes. Otherwise, the next thing I love is my immersion blender. It's called a stick blender, I guess, too.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I have one of those. I never heard it called an immersion blender before.
Oh, yeah, because it gets immersed
that would make
in
sense.
your pot.
That would make sense. You and your big fancy words. Cool. So you talked about eliminating dairy for a while. Is dairy back on the menu for you now that you've kind of sorted some things out, or?
Yeah, after eating clean for, probably 5 years or so, it took a few years for kind of my system to get resituated and used to some things, and then I could gradually start reintroducing. So I reintroduced dairy pretty slowly. Liquid dairy is still a problem for me, so I can't have milk like liquid milk. I can do fermented, so like yogurts, firm cheeses. Soft cheeses are still a little questionable, like cream cheese will still bother me. Sour cream, sometimes. And I mean, there is a logical reason to that because the fermentation process and the aging process for cheeses and yogurts and stuff will, take out some of those proteins or whatever that agitate, or sugars, I'm not sure which it is, but probably the sugars, I guess that would make more sense. Takes those out, the things that don't sit well, I guess, with people with sensitivities.
Well, that's the thing. Dairy is such a complex substance. There are so many enzymes and proteins and sugars, and they all play differently, and how much they're heated up during their process can change all of those things. And I know not a lot of people, I know a handful of people who have sworn up and down they couldn't have dairy, and then they had grass-fed, low-temperature pasteurized dairy, and it completely changed everything for them. So it's you have to be careful not to toss out the baby with the bathwater, I guess. But
right.
The other thing I wanted to kind of touch on, you talked about 5 or 6 year process to get this sorted out for you. I think a lot of people sort of expect, well, I'm going to change my diet and then I'm going to be better. now, like next week, I'm going to be healthy and slimmer and smarter and better looking. Can you talk about like kind of how that struggle was for you? And obviously you were investigating this all on your own. Did you have help or a mentor that you looked to?
I originally, when I first was diagnosed with the Meniere's disease, it was a long time in the making. I'm thinking, because I was sure raised on farm-raised meats and veggies and stuff, but it was still the era of convenience foods. So there was a whole lot of condensed soups in our casseroles, being from the Midwest, hot dish. Mm-hmm. And Hamburger Helper, it was processed something at every meal. And a whole lot of like sugary cereals in the morning was my standard breakfast growing up. So I feel like, it takes years to make yourself feel not great and not optimum. So, it would make logical sense that it's going to take years to reverse some of that, and really when you're so depleted from those nutritional values that you should have in your body, it takes a while to get those stores back up. So I guess I think that you'll feel a lot better even after a month of just eating clean. A lot of that just kind of like suddenly kind of vanishes, but it does take a long time to correct any sort of like chronic ailments.
Where did you find the information to start you down the path of getting healthy again?
There was a chiropractor I had worked with, and he was very heavy into natural foods, like just everything needs to be whole foods, and this is what's going to make you better. I wasn't ready to hear that yet at that point. I was like, whatever. And then my allergist that I've been working with, because on top of the Meniere's stuff, I also had like some severe allergies that developed after having kids. And he was all about, hey, read this book on being well and eating healthy and do this. And I had an acupuncturist that I had checked out. This was all after I had already kind of tried all the conventional methods of feeling better. And my ENT, your doctor, had basically said, I don't have anything else for you. I don't want to do anything major because you're not that far yet. But if we can't correct it with dietary changes, I said, then we're going to have some other serious things and lifestyle changes to consider. And it was scary. So I turned to the more all-natural, the chiropractor, or my allergist, who is from India, so he has a very, very strong base in natural whole foods philosophy. And they kind of pushed me in that realm, and after hearing it from them, probably for a year or so straight or more, finally decided to kind of check it out, and I did a lot of research on the internet and kind of just went from there and learned on my own mostly.
Okay, so it's a lot of people telling you, hey, you should try this thing. You're going, nah, I don't want to try. No. That is the path of most of us, I feel like. It's the meme I saw the other day, the conversation between someone and their body. Gosh, I don't know why I don't feel better. And their body says, eat a vegetable, get some sleep. Gosh, I'll just never feel better. Yeah. Right. You said Hamburger Helper. So I'm picturing you putting this beautiful grass-fed beef in Hamburger Helper, and it just makes me so sad. One of the things you really talked about, or that you are good at when you put your recipes out, is tying the meal to a reason, right? So you just had this really interesting postpartum recipe that had like a blueberry something on it. It was the most.
Yeah, the blueberry miso.
Yeah, and I would never have thought blueberries I just never would have thought of that flavor profile. But the overall concept is, like you're saying, eat with a purpose. Like, what is your reason for this meal? It's just like a workout, right? You have to if you go in the gym and just like move some things around, you're not necessarily going to get better at anything. So, how do you develop those recipes with that purpose? What kind of things do you tie together?
Well, so for this, I knew the theme was to focus on pregnancy or postpartum type foods. So I started with researching what nutritionally is good for those phases of a mom's pregnancy and post-childbirth. So once I figured out and made my little list of foods, and I said, which ones look like they would taste good in combination? And I always grew up cooking from taste rather than from measurements. So a lot of times I'll sniff a food and I'll be like, this spice smells like it would work well with this. This seems like it would go well with this. Or sometimes I'll be like, well, what can I make as a sauce with blueberries? And I might see like a blueberry vinaigrette, and then I saw a miso vinaigrette, and I'm like, well, what if I marry the two together and make a miso blueberry sauce? Because that sounds like it might be tasty. And then I try it, and I'm like, ooh, that was good.
That's never would have thought. I mean, I'm okay in the kitchen. My wife says I'm a much better cook than I think I am, but never would have put blueberries and miso and all that together. Really cool. So you also do a lot of you do some vegetarian stuff. You've got kid food fixes. Are everybody's food needs kind of the same? Do you find a lot of symmetry?
There is, like, we all need a variety of nutrients, and we all
Okay.
have nutritional needs in that sense, but I think different phases of life merit different nutritional needs. And I also think it depends on, like, for example, if you're a heavy athlete trainer, or training heavily, you're going to need, or if you're a bodybuilder, you're going to need more protein. If you're more of an endurance person, you might need more carbohydrates. So those nutritional needs will change, but the quality of the food that you're consuming should be similar.
Right. So one of the things that I run into a lot is, I have some body composition loose goals. I'm not a bodybuilder, but I'm an endurance athlete, so every pound I have to carry with me for a half marathon or marathon costs me, right? So
Right.
one of the things I run into is that I cook a little bit like you, sort of what's in the kitchen that I can throw together, and that comes up against most nutrition plans which require you to weigh, measure, quantify in some way. Is there a strategy you use specifically for athletes to make sure that they're getting enough and not too much to balance those things out, or is it really by feel?
It really is for me by feel. I don't have
Okay.
a ton of experience in the athletic realm, to be honest. I cook and I eat by what makes me feel the best, and I guess that's mostly what I recommend for others too. Is like, if you feel better and feel like you're performing better both in your body and your mental acuity with more protein or more fat in your diet, like I do well with a lot more fat, so I tend to have a lot more avocados, nuts, and olive oils and stuff like that. But I know people, like I have a good friend who's much more of an endurance type athlete, and she eats a ton of whole grains, and that's what makes her thrive, and a lot less protein value.
How do you develop that kind of biofeedback or awareness of what your food is doing for you? I think a lot of people, especially in the United States, you grow up with fish sticks and tater tots. Everything that you eat is brown.
Yep. Yep.
How do you sort of can you teach people to have the kind of hey, I ate this and 10 hours later I felt this way kind of instinct relationship with food?
You can. If you really want to train your body to do that, I think the most important thing to do is keep a food journal. And that's kind of how I started realizing what foods were causing me difficulties, because sometimes those relationships between what you eat and how you feel don't occur for a day or two or even more later. So like when I started out, I would write down, here's what I had for lunch, here's what I had for every single thing. Not necessarily the amounts of it, but just the general food categories and what exactly it was. And then I would document, well, how am I feeling at this point in time? How am I feeling, a day later? How am I feeling? And then really be able to kind of get a feel for, well, I notice a pattern of when I eat this, 4 hours later, I start getting really congested, or I start really getting just kind of and tired and fatigued, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can train yourself in that manner. I think the other way is to do it kind of by feel. Once you can't go from like standard American diet to trusting your instincts with macronutrients though right away, because the standard American diet, relying so heavily on heavily sugared sodiums, processed foods, stuff like that, it throws your hormone balance off. And when that is thrown off, your hunger cues get thrown off, because you're essentially starving your body by not getting the right nutrients. So even though you have a lot of calories, you're not necessarily nourished. Does that make sense? And so your body's always craving what it actually needs, and therefore you eat more. So once you've cut out those things for a period of time, I don't know if there's a magic time frame for cutting all the processed stuff out, but your body gradually gets tuned into, hey, I don't need to have that much food. I don't need to have. And if you are able to just be mindful and take a step back and eat slowly and think to yourself, okay, am I actually eating because I'm hungry, or am I eating because it's old habit? And I think at some point you realize I'm just eating because it's habit, not because I'm actually hungry. And you realize that you can start to trust your hunger cues, because you're eating the nutritionally what you need to have, versus like just eating, just unmindfully snacking on Doritos or whatnot.
I think hydration plays a big part in that too. I mean, I definitely notice that if I'm dehydrated, I'm also hungry. So I try to
Yes.
get a glass of water in me every couple hours or so, just to make sure that I'm not cramming down extra food out of a misinterpreted cue. There was I think it was a piece by Dan Sullivan was talking about the PYY hormone, that is the hormone that signals satiety, and it was fascinating to me because metabolism is such an endocrine system heavy process anyway. That
Mm-hmm.
this, I mean, if you throw your endocrine system off, nothing's going to work right. Nothing's going to taste right. You're going to crave the wrong things. The things that you crave are not going to scratch the itches that your body has. It's a big mess. Where do people find you besides your beautifully? Do you take all your own photos for your pictures on Breaking Muscle?
I do.
Are you also offering a course in how to photograph your food? Because I feel like there's a lot of people on Instagram who could take a lot of tips from you on how to make food look better.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So besides Breaking Muscle, where can we find you out on the web?
I have my food blog called Cooking Up Clean, so that would be www.cookingupclean.com.
Cooking Up Clean.
And of course, I do have social media accounts as well. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I do post to Google Plus if you happen to be on it. It's more of an SEO type optimization thing versus anyone really following there. I occasionally have some Twitter updates as well, but Facebook and Instagram are like the two primary. If you're on any of those fun food porn sites, I'm on Food Gawker, Taste Spotting, and Healthy Aperture. And occasionally, if I have vegan, there's a site called Finding Vegan, or I believe that's what it's called, and I will post vegan stuff out there too.
Cool. Great. All great information. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll definitely have to chat again in the future about nutrition and the mindfulness behind it. Kari Lund, Breaking Muscle, we'll talk to you again.
Thank you much.